And we'll talk about that in the next person I talk about, which was my pick. And my pick for this week was Chris Jericho. So I'll take this first. I think the best year for Chris Jericho was 2001. And that's not because of the Undisputed title. I think it was because that's when he finally came into his own. You know, one of my favorite Raw moments is when he beat Triple H with the fast count on Raw. And they will always say, like, we wanted to catch a feel for Jericho. If the crowd actually wanted, the crowd would receive it well, and they did. But in 2001, Jericho he basically hit everything out the park. He started in the mid card, then grew into the main event. The ladder match with Benoit at the Rumble, underrated. He had the fun feud with William Regal, and then he starts teaming with Benoit and had that awesome triple threat match at King of the Ring. And then I guess you could say he capitalizes on the alliance thing with Triple H being out, because he had a great great summer, and that led to No Mercy when he would challenge The Rock for the WCW Championship and finally win the big one. And that match was fantastic, well, underrated match also. And then he would continue that feud with The Rock, turn heel at the Survivor Series, and then ultimately become the first ever undisputed champion to end 2001. But Jericho, it's like we got the best of Jericho that entire year. One of the biggest stars in the company, biggest baby faces in the company that year, to the most hated heel. And that's not something that you could always say in wrestling, that you go from the biggest baby face to the biggest heel. So 2001 is Jericho's best year, in my opinion. If I had to pick a second one, I'd probably say 2000 and I'd probably say 2016. And that might be biased because that's the year we started this show. But 2016 gave me so much fun and happiness with Chris Jericho, and when he introduced the list. Not the best from an in-ring perspective, but he did give us the AJ Styles matches. He gave us the stuff with Kevin Owens.
Those were great.
A lot of fun memories with Chris Jericho.
Y2 AJ.
Yes, the short-lived tag team. So I'm gonna go with 2001 as my favorite. Well, not my favorite. I think that's the best Chris Jericho year.
Not to be too repetitive, but obviously, I don't want to lean into, obviously any of his Mid-South wrestling, Calgary wrestling, WCW or ECW, where to the diehards, he, made some name for himself. WCW, he obviously did some great, funny stuff there. I really liked what he was starting in 2018 and what became 2019 for Jericho. Obviously, him leaving WWE, having a couple banger matches in New Japan, being in 2019 is, where I was starting to think when you brought Jericho up, becoming the inaugural AEW world champion, the Hulk Hogan of the company for that first year, kind of what Hogan did for WCW in the mid to late 90s, putting the company on the map. I love and think very fondly of what Jericho's character was like in those first 2 years at AEW. So that's why I was leaning towards 2019. Sentimentally, 2016 is hard to not, favor. All those promos, all those list promos are the definition of evergreen. You can put that Survivor Series promo of Raw versus SmackDown. Hey, who's that? Chince McMahon, I don't like you. All that stuff is so good. You going with 01, and I was even thinking about 02. He, his one and only main event WrestleMania. He, his character went through a lot then, and 03 we got a babyface run. But just like my best friend, I'm going with 2001 as the prominent year of Chris Jericho. Obviously, his character went through a wide range. He was firmly in the mid card, come around the Rumble that year. Then, he had a couple great matches challenging Austin for the world title. Everything he did, stepping up with people like Benoit and Hunter being out during the invasion. He was always really in a title picture, whether he was challenging for, the WWF title, the WCW title, the US title. He was always around. I love the image of him being the WCW champion and one half of the WWF tag champions. Like, everyone loves talking about the Rock and Sock connection as like a mixed weird like team. I always go back to that image of Rock. It was like, bedfellow tag teams. Like it was like, two guys that hate each other, but classic Vince formula, ended up being champions. And eventually he got that win over The Rock. It was him finally winning his big one. And then he got to put the cherry on top in December at Armageddon. So 0-1 for Jericho for sure.
Yeah, I'm glad we're in agreement, because I said 2016, I said that might be a bias. And then I was thinking about 2000, because he essentially feuded with Benoit a whole year, and feel how you feel about Benoit, but those matches were all awesome, because all those 2000 pay-per-views, those are like my comfort. That's like my comfort area. It doesn't matter which pay-per-view. I'll put them all on and binge them all like it's nothing. But
I had an interesting conversation once, like early COVID, when I was, arguing that Jericho is like one of the greatest of all times. And it was to somebody of all time, somebody, a lapsed fan, hasn't watched wrestling in years, decade plus. And they were like, how is Jericho better than this person or this person? I was like, well, what do you mean? And he's like, well, how often was he in that world title picture? And I was like, all right, well, you watched in 01, right? Well, 01's when he won his first world title. And look who, he beat The Rock for it. And they're like, oh, yeah, wait, he did. And I, bring up 01. And I was like, he's like, yeah, you know what? 01, I feel like he was always scratching for the title. And I was like, yeah, and at the end of the year, he won it. And I'm like, look at us now, 18 years later, and he's the first world champion in a new company. And it talked some sense into, or at least made enough of an argument where the guy was like, I'm not going to say I agree with you, but I think you make a really good point.
Yeah, Chris Jericho definitely in GOAT debate. It's not even debatable. It really is not. And also another year I thought about was like 2008, because in 2008, that whole I was watching, but a lot of it's a blur, because a lot of it, unless you're talking about like the whole Shawn Michaels thing, a lot of it was a blur to me. It was. All right, Arrow says first undisputed champion. Beat Rock and Austin the same night. No one can say that. Yeah, that's GOAT stuff right there.
Mm-hmm. He's never even told anybody that's that.
All right, so last week you weren't with me last week, but I know you had some things to talk about the New Day being released, and I'm not sure if about anybody else, but I know specifically that you brought to my attention about the New Day you want to talk about.
Just them. I mean, again, one of the things that really with this show is kind of like you just said you're biased for Jericho 2016. I mean, in a way, and with the direction the product's been going, I really, when Monday, if I turn on Raw at 9:00 and it's been on